Hello, my friends. How are you doing today? This is Mrs. Surratt, U.S. History teacher, and I'm here to talk to you about a change in United States foreign policy, how American influence is beginning to expand. And we're talking about the end of the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s, that time period, which you could also call the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. And we're going to be looking at the change to foreign policy from when the country began to the time period that I'm describing. So basically about 125 years is what we're looking at a change in. There is down here a YouTube video that you can go check out if you would be interested. Pardon me for pulling up my laser pointer here. Or you can watch my recording and learn with me. So isolationism is the policy that the United States began with in the late 1700s, kind of around that turn of the century again, between 1700s to 1800s. And when the United States started, there was this belief that the United States should kind of stay out of things. For one thing, it was just practical. We weren't really ready to get involved in big foreign wars. We're still trying to figure out ourselves as a country. And you remember in George Washington's farewell address, he says to his countrymen, stay distant, stay detached, stay out of foreign affairs. Meanwhile, Thomas Jefferson, he comes along, and as president, he tells everyone, be friends, work with commerce, trade with other countries, but don't get involved in their affairs. Let them do their thing. If they're having a fight, you send them over here and you go trade with somebody else. So the United States is really overall in the beginning trying to stay out of foreign military entanglements. But there are a few exceptions. Notably, the Monroe Doctrine. Remember, we talked about that. And in 1832, the Spanish colonies in Central and South America are fighting for their independence. So, of course, Spain and other European countries are coming in trying to not only keep their colonies, but also take over some new areas, which leads us to the Monroe Doctrine. President James Monroe says, okay, here's the deal. United States and all the countries in the Americas, we're off the table. You have colonies, it's fine, you can keep them, but you cannot create any new ones. And if you come in and try to fight with the countries that are becoming independent, you got to deal with us. So the Monroe Doctrine, and here's this wonderful political cartoon. Here's Uncle Sam, the representation of the United States. You can see he's thrown his hat into this ring, which we also know as a hemisphere. Basically, what the United States is saying is if the Europeans try to come in and set up new colonies, they're going to have to deal with us. We're going to resist that. Or if they get involved in countries that are independent, especially in this area, Latin America down here, then we're going to get involved. But basically, if you stay on your side, which is over here, we will stay on our side, which is over here, and we will not get involved in your affairs. So if they want to take over areas over here, go for it. But the Americas are off limits. And this basically suggests that Europe and the Americas are two separate spheres, or in this case, circles, but you understand the term of a sphere, a big ball. And the United States is going to be a leader over here in the Western Hemisphere, and Europe can be the leader over here in the Eastern Hemisphere. So the Monroe Doctrine was kind of our first steps into foreign affairs, sort of taking a stand. But we're going to see a change now. Remember the Industrial Revolution? We've got tons of new technologies coming along. We are manufacturing. We've got this new sense of power. We finished a war. It didn't destroy us. Woohoo! So we're seeing this move towards imperialism, the idea of taking over other countries to extend our own power by having political or economic control over these other areas. And you might wonder, why are we moving from staying out of everybody's way to getting so fully involved? Well, for one thing, we need some new raw materials. We need some new markets. I mean, we've got all these wonderful products. Where do we trade them? Everybody's trading the same thing, so we need places that don't have it yet so that they're going to want these things. And of course, then we can go in and take out the raw materials. Also, we've got this time period of missionary zeal. Remember the Great Awakening, the idea that, you've got this religious connection and now you use it to ease people's suffering. Well, this was just another extension of it. it. The idea of these inferior people who aren't civilized and don't understand Christ, and they need the word brought to them. So missionary zeal at this time was pushing countries to get involved, especially the United States, kind of pushing us out into other countries with the idea that we were civilizing these people. Now, whether or not you agree with that is your choice. Also, we're just trying to build wealth, guys. At this point, we've kind of realized that if we want to be the richest and most powerful country in the world, we got to have more land. More land means more money and therefore more power. It kind of goes back to mercantilism. Remember, we talked about mercantilism, the idea that a country needed to have colonies in order to make itself richer and have more raw materials. So this is sort of an outgrowth of that idea. There's still the idea that money brings power and protect that money. And remember, we talked about Darwinism, the idea of the survival of the fittest. You know, whoever's the strongest should survive, and if you're not strong, well, sorry, we'll miss you. This goes into an idea of international economic competition. So the idea that the strong countries will survive and the weak countries will get swallowed up. It also goes along with the idea of laissez-faire. Remember, we talked about that when we were doing the Industrial Revolution in the United States. Laissez-faire says that the government should stay out of economic issues because the strongest businesses would survive and crush the smaller businesses. So we're still seeing that idea of Darwinism, kind of the survival of the fittest in different arenas, I should say. Well, this is going to lead us to kind of our first imperialist war, which is the Spanish-American War. Now, some of you might argue that our first imperialist war was the Mexican-American War, and that's certainly true, but this is kind of the first one outside of our country, because if you remember, the Mexican-American War was for land that we took to be part of our country, and the Spanish-American War is for land that is outside of the United States. The United States gets very interested in Cuba. We've always kind of wanted to buy it from Spain, and we keep asking Spain for it, and Spain doesn't want to sell. And then Cuba, from 1868 to 1878, gets involved in wars for independence. And the Americans sympathize with Cuba. You know, they're the underdogs, and they're fighting against the large colonial power. Kind of reminds them of their beginning days against Britain. During the Second War for Independence, because this isn't the first time Cuba's tried to become independent, but it's sort of the first time they had a shot. A revolution starts in 1895, and they use guerrilla warfare. Now, I'm not talking about, you know, apes or monkeys. Ooh, ooh, ah, ah. No, guerrilla campaigns are when you have a small force who sneaks up on a larger force and just attacks little pieces out of them, just kind of takes little bits out of them. So they'll rush up, they'll blow up a building, or they'll shoot at the people here, and then they'll rush off before the big force really has a chance to kind of amass and go after them. It's a good way for a small group to attack a large group. Not that I want to find out anyone's here attacking large groups, but it destroys American-owned sugar mills and plantations, and this really sort of brings a split in the American opinion, because business leaders, they want to support Spain. They don't want any of this chaos. They don't want to lose their sugar mills and plantations. But the smaller, you know, non-business people, the workers, you might say, they really support the Cubans. You know, that the United States should go in there and protect Cuba. And here you can see a cartoon that came up. Here's Uncle Sam pulling his boats towards Havana, Cuba, and there will be war with Spain. We'll get to that. But here that he has come to defend Cuba, and war is on the horizon. You can see behind him the idea that war is inevitable. Well, Spain takes action in Cuba once this guerrilla warfare is starting to kind of get out of hand, in their opinion. In 1896, they send in their general Valeriano Weyler, and I apologize if I have mispronounced that, but his nickname is the Butcher. And they send him to restore order to Cuba, and he's known for his very cruel and inhumane tactics. You can see here he puts 300,000 Cubans in the concentration camps, and here you notice that the children don't really even seem to have clothing or some of the basics that they need. So they were treated very horribly. And during this time period, newspapers are becoming a very viable business. They're not just for telling you what's kind of going on in your area. Now they're starting to be about telling you what's going on in the world. And the newspapers are using these sensational headlines about the evil Weyler to circulate their newspapers to grow their circulation. And this is a time period we're going to see yellow journalism, and I'll get into that in a moment. But the idea of yellow journalism isn't just to say, here's what happened. It's to find a way to exaggerate and stretch the truth a little bit. You're not lying, but you're not exactly putting it in the most honest sense. And here's a newspaper cartoon from that time period. Here's the evil Wyler, the villain who's rubbing his hands. Greedily, he's going to take over Cuba. And then you have the defenseless woman of Cuba. Please, my hero, save me. And then you've got the United States, who's there to be the big, strong hero. So that's the idea behind this cartoon. Yellow journalism, as I mentioned before, this is the idea of kind of stretching or exaggerating the truth. And the thing is, yellow journalism, people were realizing that the journalists are kind of realizing that the public doesn't really have any way to check them. I mean, they don't have the internet, they don't have radio, they don't have TV. So if the newspaper says, here's the truth, the people basically say, oh, it must be true. You wouldn't lie, would you? Because they don't really know what's going on. And two people, Pulitzer and Hearst, took advantage of the public's ignorance. They would twist the truth around. So, for example, there's I'm going to talk about this ship called the Maine that is blown up in the harbor. And they say destruction of the warship Maine was the work of an enemy. Well, actually, this warship probably blew up by accident. It wasn't that uncommon for boiler accidents on ships, but they twisted it and made it sound like this evil Spanish were blowing up our ship. So this yellow journalism was becoming a very popular way to sensationalize your stories and to increase your circulation. People see these exciting headlines, and think about it. If you see a newspaper and it's got a headline that says, school starts tomorrow, I'm not going to read it. But if you see one that says, what are they telling our children? You might pick it up to read it, and then you find out, oh, they're telling them that school starts tomorrow. So it's just the idea of kind of getting people's attention with these sort of twisted, exaggerated headlines. Well, what happens leading to this war? Remember, the United States is sort of still on the fence. Do we get involved in wars? Do we not? And these headlines that the yellow journalists are writing are increasing American sympathy for Cuba. They're like, oh my gosh, Spain is evil. But President McKinley, he kind of wants to see if we can use diplomacy to resolve this. Let's not get involved quite yet. Let's just see if we can talk it out. There's a Spanish minister named Delome, excuse me, and he writes a letter criticizing McKinley, and it actually gets published. Someone gets their hands on it and publishes it, and it's hugely embarrassing for both the president and for Spain. Spain apologizes, they make Delome resign, but the American public's angry. What do you mean our president's weak? No, what are you talking about? And then on top of that, remember that boat I mentioned, the USS Maine, is sent to pick up United States citizens and to protect U.S. property, which blows up. Again, why? We don't know. Most likely an accident, but they use it to blame Spain. And the United States, the people get so angry they declare war in April of 1898. And Spain actually tries to agree to the United States demands, like, okay, here you go, here's what you want, we'll stop. But at this point, the public's so angry, they want war, and so war is declared. And here we go, here's the picture of the USS Maine exploding. You see here it says crisis is at hand, Spanish treachery. People want to get involved in this war. Well, the war actually, ironically, is not fought in Cuba, even though that's kind of where it gets its start. The first war happens in a place called the Philippines, which is a small island, small group of islands, I should say, kind of off the coast of Indonesia. In Asia. And the Spanish, even though they declare war and they have this big talk, they're really not ready to fight a group like the United States. The United States has much stronger military, and they actually smashed the Spanish fleet in the Manila harbor. Guys, this war starts in April. It ends in August. I mean, it wasn't much of a war. And the Filipinos actually get involved because they don't like Spain at all. They're led by a man named Emilio Aguinaldo, and they support Dewey. Now, eventually, the United States will gain control of the Philippines, and then Emilio Aguinaldo and his people will rebel against the United States. But for right now, they'd rather have the United States. So in August of 1898, the Spanish troops in Manila surrendered to the United States. And we have yet another Treaty of Paris. That's why it's a good idea to look at dates. The United States and Spain sign an armistice in 1898. And the Spain frees Cuba, which is over here. They give Puerto Rico and Guam to the United States, and these become protectorates, not states, but areas protected by the United States. And they sell the Philippines to the United States for $20 million. So you can see the United States has changed its foreign policy drastically from isolationism to imperialism. Thank you, my friends. Let me know if you have any questions.